I had been gone 11 years, and the first thing the Quill River Valley gave back to me was the sound of a man saying they meant to shoot the best horse God ever set on 4 legs. I heard it before I saw the town. I'd come down off Antelope Mesa at dusk with the dust of half a continent on me, leading a sorry buckskin that had carried me the last 400 miles, and the trail dropped me onto the wagon road just outside Ardle, where 2 men sat a buckboard talking loud the way men do when they think nobody honest is near. One of them said the gray androne stud out at the old Hale place had near killed a wrangler that week, and the cattlemen's board had voted, and come Sunday they'd put a bullet in him and be done with the trouble of him. Shame, the other said, in the way a man says it when he doesn't mean it. He's a fine-looking animal. Fine-looking gets a man's neck broke, the first one said, and shook the lines, and the buckboard rolled on past me without either of them giving the trail-worn drifter on the played-out buckskin a second look. I sat my horse in the road a while after they'd gone. The light was going copper over the river breaks, and the smell of the valley came up to me all at once. Say, warming and cooling, river willow, wood smoke from the town, the particular green smell the Quill had in spring that no other country I'd ridden ever matched. 11 years I'd kept that smell out of my mind on purpose, because remembering it meant remembering everything else, and I had not been a man who could afford to remember. Now here it was, and here I was, and somewhere out past the town a horse I had never seen was 3 days from dying. I'll tell you plain, I almost rode around the town. I'd come back for one reason, and it wasn't a horse. But a man my age has learned that the things you tell yourself you came for, and the things that actually turn the key in your chest are not always the same, and when I touched the buckskin up again, I turned him toward Ardle instead of away. The town had grown. There was a real bank now where the assay office used to be, and a second saloon, and a church with a bell, and more houses climbing the bench than I remembered. But the livery was the same weathered barn it had always been, and the old man forking hay in the runway was the same too, only gone white and bent. "Hobble," I said, and the old man straightened and squinted at me a long moment in the doorway light. Hobble Doyle had shod horses in that valley since before I was born. He looked at me the way you'd look at a word you knew and couldn't lay your tongue to. Then something moved behind his eyes. "Calabrese," he said low. "Well, I'll be go to hell." "Likely," I said. "Got a stall?" He had a stall. He took the buckskin's lead and ran a hand down the gelding's neck and didn't say anything about the state of him, which was a kindness, because the state of him said everything about the state of me. Hobble had known me when I was a boy who could gentle a green colt by talking to it across a fence for an afternoon, and he was looking now at the leavings of that boy and being decent enough not to say so. "You hear about the Hale stud," he said. It wasn't a question. In a town that size, a stranger riding in already knew the news. That was just how it worked. "On the road." "Sunday," Hobble said. He spat into the straw. "Hadn't ought to come to that. Whole thing's a shame and a swindle, and I'll say so to anybody, though it does me no good to." He hung the buckskin's lead on a nail and turned and gave me the full square of his attention, and I felt it land. "You going out there?" "To the Hale place." "That's where the horse is." "That's not why I asked the way," I said. Hobble was quiet a moment. The old know how to be quiet. "She never married again," he said finally, gentle, the way you'd set something fragile down on a table. "Frank Hale's been 3 years in the ground. She runs the place herself, and she is going to be about as glad to see you, Caleb, as a barn cat is to see the rain." "I expect so," I said. "You expect right." He picked the fork back up. "Go on then. Sunday's coming whether you stand here or not. I will tell you about Nora now, because you can't understand the horse without her, and that is the truest thing I know about that whole summer. 11 years before, when I was 20 and full of more want than sense, Nora Calhoun and I were going to be married. There was no formal thing about it, no ring, we were too poor for rings, but it was understood the way the river was understood. a fact of the country. I was breaking horses for wages and saving toward a place, and she was the prettiest hand with a needle and a garden and a sick animal that valley ever raised. And we used to sit on the cowhound porch of an evening not talking, which is the surest sign there is. And then my brother died. I won't lay the whole of it out. It was a fever winter and it took Tom in 4 days, and Tom was the only family I had, and I was the one who talked him into wintering up high with the gather where the fever found him. And when we buried him, I could not stay in that valley 1 more hour. Everything in it had his name on it. I told myself I'd send for Nora once I was settled somewhere the ground didn't accuse me. I told myself a lot of things on the road out, and I rode out at first light without waking her, with a letter I never finished in my coat. And I did not send for her, not that year nor any year after, because a man who runs once finds it easier each time, and shame is the heaviest thing there is to carry back uphill. 11 years. I drifted them all, Texas, the nations, a spell up in the high lonesome of Montana gentling horses for an outfit that paid in liquor and lies. I got a reputation in some places as a man who could bring along a horse nobody else could touch, and I lost that reputation in others by leaving before the job was done. I was 31 years old that spring and I owned a buckskin, a saddle, a rifle, and $40. And one night in a Cheyenne bunkhouse, a freighter passing through had mentioned, idle, that the Hale place up on the Quill bred the best horses north of the Platte, but the widow that ran it was about to lose the lot of them to the bank. And the name Hale had gone into me like a splinter and worked there for 2 months until I saddled up and rode south to pull it out. That was the truth I'd come back for, not the horse, her. To say the word I'd owed her for 11 years, even if she shot me on the porch for the saying of it. The horse I knew nothing about. The horse was the country's business, not mine. I rode out to the Hale place the next morning. The land hit me first. The Hale place sat in a bend of the Quill where the river slowed, and the bottoms ran flat and green, the best grass in 40 miles, and I knew that grass. I'd cut hay off it as a hired boy. The fences had gone gray, and there were rails down in a dozen places, and the barn wanted paint. But the house had a wash on the line and smoke at the chimney, and a garden coming up in straight tended rows, and you could read the whole of her 3 years in those 2 facts together. That she was losing the fight, and that she had not stopped fighting it for 1 single morning. And then I saw the horse, and I forgot for a while why I'd come. He was in the round corral by the barn, and he was the kind of animal you see maybe twice in a life of horses. 16 hands and built like he'd been poured, a blue roan so dark he showed near black in the shadow and went to silver smoke along his flanks where the spring sun caught him, with a black mane and tail and 4 black legs and a head like something off an old coin. He was not packing. That's the thing I noticed, the thing that told me everything. A spoiled horse, a mean horse, a broke-minded horse, that horse paces and weaves and frets. This one stood in the center of the corral with his head up and his weight square, and watched me come up the lane with an attention so total it was almost an insult, the way a king watches a beggar. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't crazy. He was furious, in the cold, clear way that only the smartest of them get. And he was furious because every human hand that had touched him had come to take something from him, and he had decided, the way a horse like that decides, that they could come and try. I reined the buckskin up at the corral and just looked at him, and he looked back, and I felt the thing I used to feel at 20 before the running and the years sanded it down, the thing I'd half believed was gone, a kind of recognition. There you are. He'll come through that fence at you if you crowd him. I knew the voice. 11 years and 100 other voices, and I knew it before I turned, and turning was the hardest easy thing I ever did. Nora stood at the corner of the barn with a pitchfork in her 2 hands, held not quite like a tool. The years had been on her and had not won. There was gray at her temple and lines the sun had set at the corners of her eyes, and she was leaner than the girl I'd left. All the softness worked off her by 3 years of doing 2 people's labor, And she was, standing there in a faded blue dress with her sleeves shoved up and her jaw set. The finest thing I had seen in 11 years of looking at the whole rest of the country. She knew me at once. I watched it go across her face, the recognition, and then under it something that was not gladness, that was older and harder than anger, the particular stillness of a person who has spent a long time deciding what she'd do if a certain day ever came, and is finding out she meant it. "Calabrese," she said flat, "the way you'd name a debt." "Nora, you've got nerve." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. I'll give you that. After all this time, you've got the nerve to ride up my lane in the daylight. "I do," I said. "I won't pretend I don't know I've earned worse." "You've no idea what you've earned." She set the pitchfork tines down in the dirt and stood with both hands on the handle, and behind me I heard the stallion shift his weight, that whole 1,000 pounds of him moving like water. "Whatever it has brought you, I haven't got it. The bank's got most everything and they'll have the rest by fall. So if it's old times you've come for, the old times are dead and buried out by the cottonwoods next to a better man than you, and if it's the horse—" She stopped, something changed in her face. "If it's the horse," she said slower, "then you'd better tell me right now, Caleb, because Sunday they're going to take that animal out and shoot him in front of the whole county for sport and for spite. And there is exactly one thing on this earth I would let you stand on my land for, and it's that. So which is it?" I looked at her, and I looked at the horse, and I understood that I had ridden 400 miles to say one true thing, and I was about to say a different one instead. And that maybe, the way the Lord arranges things when He's of a mind to, they were going to turn out to be the same word after all. "Tell me about the horse," I said. His name, when he had one, was Smoke, and Nora's husband had bred him on purpose to be the finest stud in the country, and had died before he could finish what he started. She told it to me at the kitchen table because there was no graceful way for two grown people to keep standing in a barnyard, and because, I think, she had carried the whole sorry tale alone too long, and even an unworthy ear was an ear. She poured coffee and did not offer me anything to eat, which I noted and did not remark on, and she sat across the scrubbed table with her hands around her own cup and told me. Frank Hale had taken a fine roan mare, and here my chest gave a small turn, because I had gentled that mare, 11 years gone, a leggy filly the Hales bought off the cowhound string the very spring I left, and I had not known until that minute that anything I'd touched in the old life had gone on living, and he'd bred her to a thoroughbred stud, a man had brought through, paid dear for the cover, and got Smoke. And Smoke from a weanling had been too much horse for the men Frank could afford to hire. Frank himself had a gift and a soft hand, and Smoke had loved him, would follow him at liberty across the bottoms like a dog. But Frank took a chill the third winter, and it went to his chest, and he was gone by spring. And after that the horse had no one who knew how to speak to him, and the men Nora hired to bring him along were the kind of men who think a horse is a problem you solve with a rope and a quirt and your own bad temper. "They threw him and tied him down," Nora said, and her voice when she said it had a thing in it I recognized, an old grief gone to flint. "To break him, the way you break a wild thing, and every man that's laid a hand on him since he's tried to kill, and I don't blame him, Caleb, God forgive me, I don't blame the horse one bit because they earned it." She turned her cup a slow quarter on the table. "But it doesn't matter whether they earned it. A wrangler named Pelt got his arm broke last week and his shoulder out, and the Cattlemen's Association decided a man-killing stud is a danger to the whole valley, and they're within their rights. They voted Tuesday. Sunday they come with rifles. And the worst of it—" She stopped. I waited. The old know how to wait, and I had gotten old somewhere on the road. "The worst of it is Dolan Skeen chairs that board," she said. "And Dolan Skeen has wanted this bottom land for 9 years, and a dead horse is just the start of what he wants gone from this valley." I knew the name now, though I hadn't placed it on the road. Skeen had come into the country the year I left, a hard, ambitious man with railroad money behind him, and in 11 years he'd bought or squeezed half the small outfits on the Quill into his brand. The hale bottoms, that fat green river ground, would be the jewel of his range. And a widow alone, behind on her note, with her one piece of real wealth, a horse the whole county had agreed to destroy. That was a woman Dahlan Skeen could afford to be patient with. "He's offered to buy you out," I said. "3 times, at a price that's an insult dressed as a mercy." She lifted her chin. "I told him no 3 times. So now there's a board vote and a Sunday and a rifle. He'll shoot the best horse in the territory to teach me what it costs to tell him no. And when the horse is dead and my note comes due in the fall and I've got nothing left to sell, he'll have the land for back taxes and call it the natural order of things." I sat with that. Outside the window I could see the corral and the dark shape of the horse standing in it, square and waiting, refusing to pace. "You haven't asked me why I think you can do anything about it," Nora said. "No. I'd be a fool to let you try. Every man that's gone in that corral, he's hurt. I won't have your blood on my ground too, whatever I think of you." "You won't," I said. "I'm not going in the corral." She frowned. "Not tomorrow," I said. "Not this week. A horse like that, you don't go into him. You let him come to you, and that takes as long as it takes, and the one thing I haven't got is the one thing it needs, which is time." I turned my cup the way she'd turned hers, and I made myself look at her straight because I owed her at least the courage of a plain face. "But I'll tell you what I've got, Nora. I've got till Sunday. And I have never in my life met the horse I couldn't get a halter on by Sunday if I was willing to never sleep. So that's the offer. Let me try. If I fail, he's no worse off than he is right now, and you've lost nothing but the sight of my back going down the lane, which I believe you'd count a fair trade either way." She looked at me a long time. The coffee went cold between us. Somewhere out in the bottoms, a meadowlark ran its whole bright ladder of notes and stopped. "Why," she said at last, "just that." And there it was, the door to the true thing, swung open in front of me, and I found I could not walk through it. Not yet. Not with the whole 11 years still stacked between us like cordwood. "Because they're going to shoot a horse that never did one wrong thing in his life except refuse to be broke," I said. "And I have spent 11 years being a man who rode away from the hard thing, and I am tired down to my boots of being that man, and I would like, one time before I die, to stay." It was not the whole truth, but it was a true thing, and she heard that it was, and something in the flint of her face shifted just slightly, the way river ice shifts a week before it goes. "You can sleep in the barn," she said, and stood and gathered the cups. "Not the house, the barn, and you'll take your meals on the porch, not at this table until I say different, which may be never." She paused at the dry sink with her back to me. "And Caleb, if you run off again before Sunday and leave me to watch them do it alone, I will load Frank's rifle myself and I will come find you, and I'm a better shot than you ever were." "I know you are," I said. "You taught me." She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders, and I have thought about that the rest of my life, how a person's whole grief and hope can stand in the set of their 2 shoulders at a dry sink, and how it took me 11 years and a condemned horse to learn to read it. I started the next morning before the sun, and I started the only way that horse could be started, which was by doing nothing at all. I carried a 3-legged milking stool out to the round corral in the gray light, and I set it down outside the rails, a good 20 feet back from where Smoke stood, and I sat down on it, and I did not look at him. That's the whole of it. That's the great secret I'd spent a life learning and would have traded all of it back for one different morning 11 years before. You sit. You let the horse have the whole burden of deciding what you are. A man who comes at a wild thing teaches it that men come at you. A man who sits teaches it nothing, and nothing, to an animal that has only ever learned bad things from your kind, is the first good thing it has ever been offered." He watched me a long while, ears hard on me, waiting for the trick. There's always been a trick. When the trick didn't come, he got restless, because a smart horse hates a thing it can't account for worse than a thing that scares it, and he blew and stamped and made one short hard rush at the rails to see if I'd jump. I didn't jump. I'd been kicked and struck and rolled on by better horses than him, and I knew the difference between a charge that means it and a question shaped like a charge, and that was a question. I stayed on the stool and looked at the middle distance, and after a while, getting no answer, he stopped asking and stood, and we passed the morning that way, the condemned horse and the worn-out man, 20 feet apart, not looking at one another, while the sun came up over Antelope Mesa and burned the dew off the bottoms. Nora brought me coffee at mid-morning and set it on the rail without a word and went back to her work, and I drank it without getting up, and smoke marked all of it, the woman, the cup, the steam, filing it away in that cold, quick mind. At noon I walked away from the corral entirely slow and ate my dinner on the porch as ordered and went back and sat back down and did nothing some more. By evening he had moved, not toward me, but he'd shifted his standing place a few feet, to where he could keep me in view without holding his neck cranked around, and to a man who reads horses that few feet was a paragraph, and the paragraph said, "I have decided you are not today a thing to kill." It wasn't much. It was 4 days to Sunday, and it wasn't anywhere near much. But I sat in the dark a long while after the light was gone, listening to him crop the little hay there was, and for the first time in 11 years I was exactly where I meant to be. I picked it up at first light and set it down 10 feet closer than the day before, and I felt him tighten the instant I lifted it, the whole big body coiling, and I set it down slow and sat down slower and went back to studying the middle distance like it owed me money. He held coiled a long minute. Then, by inches, he let it out. 10 feet closer was a thing he could allow, it turned out, so long as the man who'd done it then sat and asked for nothing. And asking for nothing was the one craft I had carried unbroken out of my whole wasted life. By the third hour he'd come off the far rail and stood in the center of the corral again, square, that king's attention bent on me but gone curious now under the fury, the curiosity working in him like yeast. A horse that's smart can't help it. The world is a puzzle to him, and a man who does nothing is the strangest piece in it. Along about mid-morning he took 3 steps toward me, mind, the first toward in God knew how long, stretched his neck out to the full length of it, and blew a great wet blast of air at me from 12 feet off, testing my smell, testing my nerve, and I sat and took the blast in the face and didn't so much as blink, and he snapped his head up and wheeled and bucked once across the corral, light, almost playful, getting the strangeness out of his body. He's never done that. Nora had come up to the rail without my hearing. She'd gotten good at moving quiet on her own place, the way you do when there's no one to make noise for. She had a basket of wet wash on her hip, and she'd stopped to watch, and there was something on her face she was trying not to let be there. "Done what?" I said, not turning, keeping my voice the flat low nothing. I kept it for the horse. "Played," she said it like it cost her. "He hasn't played since Frank. I'd near forgot he knew how." "He's deciding I'm not a wolf," I said. "Takes a smart one longer than a dull one. A dull horse'll trust anybody. This one's going to make me earn every inch, and he's right too." She stood a moment longer. Then she shifted the basket and said, "Lo, there's bacon with your dinner today," and went on to the line, and I sat very still on my stool and looked at the middle distance and felt ridiculous, a 31-year-old man, my throat go tight over a strip of bacon because I knew what it was. It wasn't bacon. It was one stone lifted off the cordwood between us and set down to the side. Just the one. But you build a whole wall back down one stone at a time, or you don't build it down at all. Dahlan Skeen rode out the afternoon of the 3rd day, and I got the measure of him in about a minute, the way you do with that kind. He came with 2 riders behind him, which is its own sentence about a man, that he wouldn't cross a widow's yard without 2 men at his back, and he sat a tall blood-bay gelding, and wore a town coat out on the range, and had a soft, heavy, handsome face going to jowl, and eyes the pale, flat blue of a thing that has never once lost, and has stopped imagining it could. He drew up at the corral where I sat my stool and looked down at me a while. "You'd be the drifter," he said. "I'd be a man sitting on a stool," I said, What you make past that is your business." One of his riders made a sound. Skeen didn't. He looked at the horse, and the horse looked back at him, ears flat, and I watched something pass between the man and the animal that told me Smoke had Skeen's number better than I did. The way the best horses always have the worst men sorted before the men have got their hats off. "That animal's been condemned by the association," Skeen said, easy, reasonable, a man explaining weather. "Sunday it'll be destroyed, public danger. You sitting out here playing at it doesn't change the vote. I'd hate to see a stranger get hurt on land that's about to have enough troubles." He let that sit, the about to have enough troubles, so I'd be sure to catch it. "You do better to ride on, friend. There's nothing on this place worth staying for. Not the horse. Not anything." And he let his pale eyes go, just for a half-second, past me to the house, to where Nora had come out onto the porch and stood with her hand shading her eyes. And the way he looked at the house was the way he'd looked at the horse, as a thing whose destruction was already entered in his ledger and merely awaiting the date. And something went cold and then very warm in me in that order, and I understood I had stopped, somewhere in the last 3 days. Being a man, it was safe to talk to that way. I stood up off the stool, slow, so as not to spook the horse, but I stood, and I was taller than Skeen had reckoned on, and trail hard in a way town money forgets exists, and I walked to the rail and put my boot up on it and looked up at him, pleasant as church. "Mr. Skeen," I said, "I'm going to tell you a true thing, Free, because you paid for the ride out and ought to get something. That horse is going to have a halter on him and be eating out of my hand by Saturday night. And Sunday, when your association men come with their rifles, they're going to find a gentled horse standing quiet on private land, and there is no law in this territory, nor any other, that lets a board of cattlemen walk onto a widow's place and shoot a halter-broke animal that's harming nobody. You voted to destroy a danger. Come Sunday, there won't be a danger. There'll just be the best horse in the territory, and a lot of armed men standing in a woman's yard with no reason to be there that they'd care to say out loud." I smiled at him. "You're a careful man. You'll have thought of how that looks. Half this valley owes you money and hates you for it, and they'll come Sunday for the spectacle, and the spectacle they'll get is the great Dahlan Skeen's hired guns backing down off a widow's porch from a horse a saddle tramp gentled in a week. I'd think on that. I surely would." The corral was dead quiet. Even the horse had gone still, feeling the thing between the men. Skeen's pale eyes had stopped being easy. He was a man who'd never lost, and he was doing the arithmetic and not liking the sum, and that is the most dangerous you can make that kind of man, but it was done now, and I found I didn't care. "Saturday," he said softly, "is a long way off. A lot can happen to a horse in a barn at night." "It can," I agreed. "And if it does, every soul in this valley will know to a certainty who it happened by, and a man can survive being hated, Mr. Skeen, but a careful man knows there's a kind of being known that money won't buy back. You go on home now. You're upsetting my horse." He sat there a moment more. Then he reined the bay around without another word and rode out at a walk, unhurried, making sure I understood the walk was a choice, and his 2 riders fell in behind, and I watched the 3 of them down the lane until the dust settled, and then I sat back down on my stool, and my hands, I'll admit to you, were not entirely steady. Behind me, from the porch, Nora's voice came across the yard, and there was a thing in it I hadn't heard from her yet. "He'll do it," she said. "What he said about the barn at night, he'll send a man." "I know it. You can't sit that corral and guard the barn both." "No," I said, "I can't." I turned on the stool and looked at her, standing there on her own porch with the whole weight of 3 years of being alone against men like that on her, and I said the thing I'd ridden 400 miles toward without knowing it was the thing. "So I'll need help, and you're the only other person on this place who knows one end of a rifle from the other, and who that horse will let near him in the dark. I can't do this alone, Nora. I never could have. That's about the size of what I came out here to learn." She looked at me a long moment across the yard. "I'll watch the barn," she said. "Frank's rifle, you keep to your horse." and then turning to go in, so low I near lost it under the meadowlarks. I never doubted you could gentle anything, Caleb. Horses were never the thing you couldn't do. She went inside. The screen door clapped, and I sat with that, the kindest and the cruelest thing she'd said to me yet, both in the one breath, and I understood it was fair, all of it, and that fair was a country I'd been out of so long I'd half forgotten it had a sky. That night we guarded the barn, the two of us from opposite ends, and a man did come. He came near 2 in the morning on foot, leading no horse, with a can I smelled before I saw coal oil, and I'll tell you, a man who'd burn a barn with stock in it to spite a widow is a particular kind, and I came up out of the hay where I'd lain still as a post for 3 hours, and I had him by the collar and the wrist before he cleared the big door, and he was young and soft and townish, and he came apart fast. I didn't hurt him past what holding takes. I walked him out into the moonlight, and Nora came down off the loft with Frank's rifle hanging easy and competent in the crook of her arm, and the boy looked from one of us to the other and started talking, the way they do, names and all, more than I'd even have asked, and the name that mattered was the one we already knew. "You'll tell that to Hobble Doyle in the morning," I said, "in front of the livery with the town to hear, and then you'll ride out of this valley and not come back, and that's the whole of what happens to you, which is a great deal more mercy than you came here carrying. You understand me." He understood me. They always do, that kind, once the thing they counted on, that nobody'd stand up, turns out not to be true. We let him go and watched him run, ungainly, down the moon-white lane, and then there was nothing but the night and the river sound and the horse in the corral watching us both with his ears up, and Nora let the rifles hammer down gentle, and stood there in her nightdress and an old coat of Frank's with her hair down for the first time I'd seen in 11 years, gray shot now and loose on her shoulders, and she was shaking, just slightly, the way you do after, when the need to be steady lets go of you all at once. I didn't go to her, I'd learned that much. You don't crowd a wild thing. "You're cold," I said. "Go on in, I'll sit the rest of it." She didn't go in. She stood looking at the horse, and at the lane the boy had run down, and then at me, and there was 11 years in her face and 3 years of nights like this one faced alone before I came, and she said, "Why did you really come back? And don't tell me about the horse this time. I've earned the true one." She had, God knows she had. So I told her. Standing in her moonlit yard at 2 in the morning with a gentled killer of a horse watching us and a barn that almost burned, I told her about Tom, the whole of it, the fever and the high gather I'd talked him into, and the 4 days in the grave, and the letter I never finished, and how shame is the heaviest thing there is to carry back uphill, and how each year I didn't come made the next year's not coming easier, and how I'd built a whole life out of riding away from the hard thing, until a freighter in a Cheyenne bunkhouse said the name Hale, and it went into me like a splinter, and I knew, finally, at 31 years old, that there was exactly one hard thing left in the world I wanted to ride toward instead of away from, and it had her face. "I'm not asking you for anything," I said. "I lost the right to ask you for anything 11 years ago in the dark, and I know it. I came to say I was sorry, that's all, and to say it where you could hit me for it. The horse," I looked at him, dark and silver in the moon. "The horse I didn't expect. The horse is just the Lord, I think, giving a coward one clean chance to stand instead of run so he can find out if there's any stand left in him. I aim to use it, whatever you decide about me." Nora was quiet a long time. The river ran, the horse blew soft. "You broke my heart," she said finally, not crying, just true. "I want you to know it stayed broke a long while, years. I married Frank with it still broke, and he knew it and married me anyway because he was a better man than you, and I gave him what I had left and it turned out to be enough, and we were happy. I won't pretend we weren't to make you feel my old hurt. We were happy. That's not the lever you came to pull, and you won't find it." "No," I said, "I didn't think I would." "But," she pulled Frank's coat tighter around her and looked at me with her loose gray hair and her steady eyes. "Frank's 3 years gone. And I am tired, Caleb. I'm so tired of doing all of it alone and being strong for the both of us when there's only one of me, and lying awake doing the bank's sums in the dark. And here you are, standing in my yard at 2 in the morning where you said you'd stand, after running from everything your whole life. I don't know what to do with you. I truly don't." Her voice caught just once and steadied. "But I'm not sending you down the lane. That's as far as I've got tonight. I'm not sending you down the lane. Go sit your horse. We'll see what Saturday brings, and then Sunday, and then we'll see what's left of us after." It was not forgiveness. It was the door to forgiveness, standing open a hand's width, with a tired woman behind it who'd been hurt too many times to fling it wide. And I have ridden a long life and slept under a lot of skis, and I tell you I never lay down happier than I did that night in the straw of her barn, with the door open a hand's width, and the horse breathing slow and trusting 20 feet off in the dark. I had the halter on Smoke Friday evening, a day ahead of my own brag, and it happened the way the true things always do, quiet, with nobody watching but the one who mattered. 5 days of sitting. 5 days of moving the stool closer by inches, of letting him come and blow and wheel and come again, of being in the corral by the 3rd day standing not sitting but still doing nothing, hands at my sides looking away, of letting him walk up behind me and lip at my hat brim and snort and spook himself at his own daring and bolt and come back. 5 days of teaching a horse who'd learned that men take, that here at last was a man who only waited. Friday evening with the sun going copper the way it had the night I rode in, he walked up to me square and unforced and put his great dark head down and pressed his forehead flat against my chest, the whole heavy trusting weight of it, the way Frank's son of a horse had once leaned on Frank, and stood there, and let me breathe. And I slid the halter up his face slow as sunrise and buckled it, and he never moved, and it was done. Nora was on the porch. She always was by then, of an evening, with her mending in her lap and her eyes on the corral more than the mending. I heard her come down the steps. I heard her cross the yard. And when I turned with the lead in my hand, and the great gentled horse following loose at my shoulder like a dog, like Frank's dog, like the thing he'd been bred and born to be before bad men taught him otherwise, she was standing at the rail with her hand pressed flat over her mouth and the tears running plain down her face at last, not hidden. And she looked at the horse, and then she looked at me, and the door that had stood open a hand's width came open the rest of the way, not with words. There weren't going to be words for it, but with the look, and I led the horse to the rail, and she put her hand out trembling and laid it on his neck, and he let her. And the 3 of us stood there in the copper light, and that, I have always thought, was the wedding. The Sunday after was just the paper. That at the rail was the marrying. "Sunday they're still coming," she said, through the tears, half a laugh in it now. "You know that. You've gentled the horse and you've half gentled me, and Dolan Skeen is still riding out here Sunday with rifles." And day came up clear and hot, the kind of high blue morning the Quill country does better than any place. And they came with it, the whole valley, the way people will for a killing or a wedding and can't always tell you in advance which they're hopping for. They came in wagons and on horseback and afoot, the small ranchers who owed Skeen money and hated him for it, the town folk, the church-emptying families in their Sunday black hobbled Doyle on his old mule, the storekeeper, the banker himself looking uncomfortable in the heat, drawn out by the same thing that draws a crowd to any hard thing, the chance to watch, and to tell it after. They ranged themselves along the lane and the bottom fences in a long, uneven line, 100 souls and more, and they were quiet the way a crowd goes quiet when it isn't sure yet what it's come to be part of. Dolan Skeen came last, the way that kind always does, so the crowd would be set before he arrived to be the thing they were all already looking at. He came with 6 riders now, not 2, all armed, the association's hired men, and 3 older cattlemen of the board riding stiff beside him in their good coats, men who'd voted a vote in a back room on a Tuesday, and were finding out on a Sunday that votes have a way of growing a crowd around them they hadn't pictured. They drew up in the lane, and Skeen sat his blood bay and looked down the fence line at all those faces and then across the yard at the corral, and his pale, flat eyes found me, and found Nora standing at my shoulder, and found, last, the horse. Smoke stood loose in the corral, no rope, no tie. I turned him out free that morning on purpose. The halter off, nothing on him at all. The great dark roan standing square and easy in the center of the round pen in the hot blue light. His coat gone to silver smoke along his flanks, switching at a fly, calm as a church horse. And the crowd along the fences had been murmuring about that since they came, because they all knew what he'd been. Every soul there knew the Hale stud was a man-killer the board had condemned. And here he stood quiet as milk with no rope on him at all, and they could not make it fit. "Reese," Skeen said, his voice carried, pitched for the crowd, reasonable, regretful. "This is a legal matter and you've drawn a crowd to it for no good reason. The association voted to destroy a dangerous animal. That vote stands. Stand aside and let my men do a hard job and these good people can go home." I stepped up onto the bottom rail of the corral so the crowd could see me, and I pitched my voice to carry too, because I'd learned a thing from him at least, that a Sunday like this is decided as much by the watching as by the men in the middle of it. "You voted to destroy a danger, Mr. Skeen," I said. "That's the word in your own minute book, I'd wager. A danger. So I'd ask the board, and I'd ask every man and woman on these fences to judge it with their own two eyes." And I dropped down off the rail, on the inside into the corral, with the condemned man-killing stud loose 10 feet away, and the whole crowd drew one breath together and held it. And I walked away from the horse. That's the thing they tell still, the ones old enough to have been there. That's the part that went into the telling. I didn't go to him. I turned my back on him and walked across the corral to the far rail and stood there with my back to 1,000 pounds of horse the county had sworn would kill any man who came near. And I whistled, low, 2 notes, the way I'd taught him through the week, and behind me I heard him come. He came at a walk across the corral, unhurried, and he walked up behind me and put his head down over my shoulder and pressed his forehead to my chest the way he had Friday evening. And I reached up without looking and scratched his jaw. And a sound went through that crowd, a low sound. 100 people letting a held breath go all at once into something like a moan or a cheer that hadn't decided which to be. I turned around. I walked the length of the corral and he followed loose at my shoulder, no rope, his nose at my elbow, and I stopped and he stopped. And I lifted my arm and he swung his hindquarters. I dropped it and he squared. I walked and he walked, the great dark beautiful horse stepping soft as a shadow behind a saddle tramp, the two of us moving around that pen like one thing in the hard blue light, and the crowd was making the sound steady now, the cheer winning out over the moan, men taking their hats off without knowing they did it, the way you would in a church. "There's your danger, Mr. Skeen," I called over the noise, and I didn't have to pitch it loud anymore, they'd have heard a whisper. "Walk into this corral right now, any one of you board men, and put a halter on him. He'll let you. He'll let a child do it. There's not a man here that horse would harm unless a man came at him to harm him first, and you all know the difference. Every one of you that's ever raised stock knows it down to your boots." I stood with my hand on the horse's neck and looked along the line of faces. You came to watch the best horse in this territory shot dead in a widow's yard because one cruel man wanted her land and a few tired men signed a paper without thinking what they were signing. Well, here's the horse. Somebody fetch a rifle and do it. Do it in front of your children and your wives, with him standing quiet and harming nobody. Or go home and let a widow keep the one good thing she's got left. And let this be the Sunday the Quill Valley decided it wasn't going to be that kind of place anymore. It was quiet then, even the meadowlarks held off. And into that quiet old hobble Doyle, sitting his mule at the rail, said, loud and cracked and clear, "I've been shoeing horses 60 years and I never seen the like of it. And I'll be damned to the pit before I'll watch you shoot it, Stallion, and I'll say so to your face and to every man you hold paper on." And another voice took it up down the line. And another, the small ranchers, the ones who owed him, finding all at once in the safety of the crowd and the sight of the horse the thing they'd lacked alone. A place to stand. And the 3 bored men in their good coats looked at each other and looked at the crowd and looked at that gentled horse. And one of them, the oldest, Amos Tate, who'd known Frank Hale, swung down off his horse heavy and slow, and walked up to the corral rail and took his hat off. "I move we rescind the vote," Amos Tate said to the other two, not loud, but the quiet carried it to every ear. "There's no danger here, any man can see it. I was a fool to sign it, and I'll say that too. The vote's rescinded, the horse stands." He looked at Skeen, and there was a whole valley's worth of years in the look. "And I'm done, Dallin, with the board, with your business. I'm an old man, and I'd like to go to my grave having stood up one time. The horse stands." The other two board men, with the crowd's eyes on them and Amos Tate's example in front of them, nodded, mumbled, made it three. And it was over. Just like that, the way these things go over when enough tired people find their feet at once. Not with a fight, but with an old man taking his hat off at a corral rail and saying the horse stands, and the whole machine of the thing simply stopping, because a machine like that only ever ran on everyone agreeing to be afraid. And they had, all of them together in one hot blue Sunday morning, stopped agreeing. Dallin Skeen sat his blood bay in the lane with his 6 hired guns who had nobody left to point a rifle at, and he looked at the crowd that had been his and wasn't any more, and he was careful man enough to read a ledger when the sum had gone against him past all fixing. He didn't bluster. I'll give him that, the way you'd give a hard frost its honesty. He gathered his reins. "You'll lose this place anyway, widow," he said to Nora, the last card flat. "The note comes due in the fall, horse or no horse. Sentiment doesn't pay a bank." And Nora Hale stepped up onto the corral rail beside me, on her own land in front of her whole valley, and answered him in her own voice. And I want it set down that it was hers, not mine. I gentled the horse, but no man on this earth gentled Nora. She stood up out of her own strength and always had. "My note's near $400, Mr. Skeen," she said, clear and carrying. "And I've got the best gentled stallion in the territory standing in this corral. The get of him worth 1,000 to any breeder north of the Platte, which every man on this fence just watched proved before their eyes. I'll have stud fees and colts to sell by spring and a line of breeders to the door, and Amos Tate there knows 3 men who will book a mare before he's off my land." She didn't raise her voice, and she didn't need to. "I'm not selling. Not the land, not the horse, not 1 inch of either, not to you nor anybody. I never was. You just couldn't hear a woman say no, so I'm saying it one more time in front of everyone, slow so it sticks. No. Now get off my place, Mr. Skeen. You're upsetting my horse." And the crowd, that whole valley along the fences, laughed, a great rolling release of a laugh, because she'd given him his own man's words back. "You're upsetting my horse," though she couldn't have known I'd said them, and the laugh was the end of him in that country. A man can survive being hated, but he cannot survive being laughed at by the people he spent 9 years making afraid. And Dallin Skeen knew it, and he reined his blood bay around and rode down the lane with his 6 guns trailing. Through a crowd that didn't part for him so much as merely let him go, and we none of us ever had much trouble from him again. He sold out within 2 years and went east, they said, to be a careful man somewhere that didn't know him. The valley breathed easier when he'd gone, but it was that laugh that did it, and the laugh was Nora's, and I would not take 1 feather of it from her. She kept the land. She kept the name Hale over the gate where it had been, where it stayed. We were married in the autumn in the little church with the bell, when the cottonwoods down along the Quill had gone to gold, and I will tell you that I asked her plainly and gave her every road out of it, and she took my hand and said yes of her own free will, with her eyes open to every flaw in the man she was taking, which is the only kind of yes worth a thing. I did not come to that marriage as a man who'd rescued anybody. I want that understood here at the end, because the valley made a legend of it, and the legend got it partly wrong, the way legends do. They tell it that a brave cowboy rode in and saved a doomed stallion and won the widow and beat the rich man, and that's the shape of it near enough, and it's a fine thing to tell of a winter evening. But the truth under the legend is gentler and harder both. I didn't save anybody. A condemned horse and a tired, strong woman saved a coward. That's the truer telling gave a man who'd run from every hard thing in his life 1 corral, 1 week, 1 Sunday, to find out whether there was any stay left in him, and let him discover, to his everlasting surprise, that there was. Nora never needed saving. She'd have kept that land another way or gone down fighting for it. She had the iron for it in her before ever I rode back. What she needed, what she allowed, eventually, against her own good sense and her own well-earned guard, was a partner, which is a different and a humbler thing for a man to be than a hero, and I have spent the 26 years since trying to be worthy of the smaller word. The horse lived to be 29. Smoke. He sired a line of roans out of the Hale place that carried our name across 3 territories and made Nora's word good before that first winter was out, breeders to the door. Just as she'd said, a mare booked before Amos Tate was off the land. Children grew up on this place who learned to ride on his gentle get, our children among them, 2 daughters and a son. And the son has the gift, the soft hand, I see it in him. And I thank God it skipped down the line to a boy who will never have to run from anything to learn what it's for. I'm an old man now, telling it from the porch where I was once made to take my meals because I hadn't earned the table. I earned the table. It took years, and it took standing through every hard thing that came after instead of riding from it. The lean winters and the sick stock and the lost colt, and the year the river jumped its banks. And Nora beside me through all of it, gray now, both of us gray, her hand still the steadiest thing I know. The Stallion's buried out by the cottonwoods near Frank, who I came to honor the memory of as the better man Nora named him, and not far from Tom, whose grave I finally went and sat by, 11 years late, the autumn I came home. The bond they made a legend of, the man and the horse, it was real, that bond, I won't say it wasn't. But the bond that saved my life wasn't with the horse. It was with the woman who let a coward stay and watched him learn to be a man who stays, and never once let him forget it was a thing he'd had to learn. That's the legend if you want the true one. A horse taught me to wait. A woman taught me to stay. And the boy who rode out of this valley at 20 with a letter he couldn't finish came home at last, the long way, by the only road that was ever going to bring him, and stayed and stays, and will stay, till they lay him out by the cottonwoods with the rest of the good and the late mended souls this hard, sweet country has gathered to itself.